Hello, and welcome to the No Wrong Notes podcast, a show hosted by me, Veronica Kokis, holistic voice teacher and singer just like you. Grab a cup of tea, relax, and sit back as we discuss all things singing technique, mindset tips, and more so you can show up as the most confident and creative singer you can be. Hey y'all, and welcome to another episode of No Wrong Notes. This week's episode is a good one as I sat down to chat with Dr. Elisa Monti about how trauma impacts the voice and how singers can work through mental blocks associated with that trauma to find more peace of mind on and off stage. This is such an important topic, and hearing Dr. Monti's perspective was so refreshing and enlightening. I know that you guys are going to really enjoy this episode. Before we get started, though, I'll share a little bit about Elisa. Dr. Elisa Monti has a PhD in cognitive, social, and developmental psychology from the New School for Social Research. Her concentration is the relationship between psychological trauma and the voice. Her mission is to contribute to further our understanding of this relationship. Dr. Monti is certified in the Montello method for performance wellness and is certified in vocal psychotherapy, trained by Dr. Diane Austin. She has years of experience working with individuals on trauma, emotion, attachment, voice, communication, self-expression, and performance. She really does it all. Dr. Monti collaborates with numerous scholars and scientists, including the Helou Laboratory at the University of Pittsburgh, the Voice Study Center, and New York Speech Pathology. She is also the president and co-founder of the Voice and Trauma Research and Connection Group and is the co-founder of the Monti Bianchi Performance Wellness. Monti Bianchi Performance Wellness has actually just opened a wellness community for artists. You can join them for free at montibianchi.com. I'll put that in the link in the show description. Dr. Monti has been the recipient of honors and awards, including the Audio-Visual Media Award in 2017 from the International Society for the Study of Trauma and Dissociation. All right, so Dr. Monti clearly has done a ton with the voice and trauma, and I'm so excited for you guys to hear this episode. So let's dive right into today's conversation. All right, so I am here with Dr. Elisa Monti. Thank you for being here today on the No Wrong Notes podcast.
Thank you so much, Veronica. It's an honor to be here.
Yeah. So let's go ahead and dive right in here. Can you tell the listeners who you are, what you do, and how you got to where you are in your career as a coach who specializes in the relationship between psychological trauma and the voice?
Thank you for asking. I have a very unusual story, but a story that I'm very passionate about. Well, let's say that formally I am an experimental psychologist, and I am also a coach specialized in a practice called the Montello method for performance wellness, and a practice called Vocal Psychotherapy, established by Dr. Diane Austin. And the way that I got here is a little bit unusual. I started out, we could say in musical theater. I went to AMDA many moons ago. I was very passionate about singing. I was very passionate about musical theater. And when I was there, I started getting the impression that there was a lot of stuff going on the emotional, psychological side for artists, including myself, that was not really talked about. Like it was all about, the technique, the alignment, put your sound here, do this, do that. But no one really looked at anything that was a little bit deeper than that. I remember seeing, colleagues of mine sing a song in a practice room perfectly, spectacularly, not missing a single note, just completely aligned with what was happening for them. And then suddenly we have maybe, musical theater class or something else. And there's a dynamic with the teacher where suddenly they can't hit any of the notes. And I'm like, I just heard you sing this perfectly. So I know that whatever is happening right now is not where you're placing the sound. Like there's something else happening. And I was fascinated by how much I was seeing things like these, by the fact that no one wanted to get into the emotional dynamics, whatever reenactments were going on, whatever past experiences were informing the voice of the singer in the present moment. That fascinated me profoundly. And so at the time, EMDA had a deal with the New School University to kind of like complete your studies and get a bachelor's degree. And when I was at the New School, I started taking a lot of psychology and music therapy classes. And I started like using that knowledge to connect some dots for myself about, oh, well, if emotions influence the body, influence our mind, influence this, influence that, could it be that it makes a lot of sense for singers in a specific way? Then at some point, I decided to get my master's degree and then eventually my PhD in experimental psych. And I became just very passionate about everything that I was learning about trauma and how trauma affects, the body, the nervous system. And I was seeing a lot of connections with how trauma possibly could be influencing voice, but no one was really talking about any direct connections from a scientific standpoint. It was more like fantastic case studies, particularly the case studies in vocal psychotherapy. Very, very fascinating. And so I decided that I wanted to specialize in practices that help me help others whose trauma history would influence their voice, and also became passionate about the research aspect of things. As much as, we're still very far behind. And at the time, we had very little. I mean, there's research when it comes to the more pathology side of things, like functional voice disorders. But when it came to quote unquote normal voices, we had like no research. So I kind of felt like I was dancing in the dark. And I still kind of am.
I love that. That is so cool and fascinating because you're right. I feel like when I was in school, had kind of similar experiences where there's a heavy focus on technique, on acting. Of course, I was more operatic, classically trained and things like that, but there's still this kind of focus on the pure technical aspects of it. And even as my voice teachers would talk to me and we would have conversations about how things were going like mentally and things like that, they're not trained in any of these sort of therapies or anything like that. They're not mental health providers. And so this is really, really fascinating. Now, part of your work involves helping individuals work through these kinds of emotional blocks so that they can express themselves more fully and authentically. For someone who may have no idea what emotional blocks manifest as, whether mentally and or physically, what can those emotional blocks, those mental struggles look like and maybe even sound like? And what advice would you give to someone having that kind of experience?
Thank you so much for asking, because that's a very important question. And I would say, on a general level, we could say that an emotional block is any type of force that's keeping us from where we are and where we want to be, what we want to have. It's almost like there's a barrier between this place we're in, this moment we're in, and what we would wish for. And I think that that can manifest as a variety of things. Like, let's say, for example, that an artist really wants to finish a piece, really wants to release their music, and they have this vision that they're going to do it, but somehow it doesn't happen. I see this with, singers, musicians, even visual artists who are like, I'm going to finish my piece, I'm going to finish my portfolio. But then there's something happening that can look like procrastination, can look like fatigue, can look like forgetfulness. And there's something happening on the sort of psychophysiological level where it's almost like the person is hitting the wall, even though they really want this target situation, they're kind of like hitting a wall. And this wall that we could call the emotional block tends to be sort of a protector. Like, let's say, for example, that, you've seen this a million times, I'm sure, like a singer really wants to be seen and heard, but there's something very scary about being seen and heard. And so the block acts as a protector, because what could happen if we were seen and heard? We could be appreciated, admired, but we could also be scolded, shamed, the things that oftentimes relate back to the original experience of that person in childhood. And so there's this very frustrating double bind for people. And so part of the sort of helping oneself with the block is to first understand the mechanisms of the block. What's happening for me mentally when the block comes up? Does it sound like they don't like what I have to put out? Does it sound like no one cares what I have to say or sing or create? How does it feel like? Does it feel like I was just about to open my music program? Next thing I know, I'm in the kitchen doing the dishes. Whoa, what happened? So it's like, what is happening internally? Maybe I started getting really sleepy, or maybe I started feeling my heart pounding, chest pain, and no, 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 I can't. So the idea of really going in, understanding what's happening, and then what tools can one implement, to help oneself, which can look like regulation tools, cognitive restructuring tools, understanding what parts of us are active when the blocks are active. Like maybe the singer self is ready to now finish the piece, and yet the inner child comes in and goes like, no, 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 we can't close the microphone, do something else that we cannot. And until we have the clarity, we might not even be very conscious of all of these layers that are going on internally.
Yeah, because oh man, there's so much to unpack here in the in
I
this
know,
question.
right?
I know. I was like listening and I'm like, wow, there's so much going on here. Yeah, because I think that when it comes to these kinds of emotional blocks, it's really, like you said, it's a protective part of ourselves that maybe developed in response to maybe some trauma, perhaps, or some perceived idea of how things are going to go, right? And I think that, working through these things, understanding like, okay, what is my response here? Do I get sleepy? Do I, end up in the kitchen doing dishes, that sort of thing? Understanding like, well, why do I do these things? Working through these traumas, preferably with a professional such as yourself. This is such crucial work to understanding and working through these things, because I have seen how trauma can show up in the voice with my own students.
Mm-hmm.
And what is one piece of advice that you would give to a singer who's maybe just starting this work of understanding like, oh, I have this response to this thing. I'm finding myself that as I'm starting this work on my song, I end up procrastinating going to do something else because I'm maybe too afraid to do this, and they're just sort of understanding what are some tools, and that sort of thing. So what is a piece of advice that you would give to somebody who's maybe just starting out this work?
Thank you so much. That's such an important question. I would say, I love when you were asking this idea with like the tone of curiosity, like, why does this happen? Or, why do these things manifest in this way? Why are these blocks present? Like to really apply a lot of curiosity, in one's own process, to be like almost like one's own Sherlock Holmes. Because oftentimes, the frustration when we have something going on, when we have these blocks, can be the why, like, why can't I sing this song? Why have I finished this piece? Why? And when we apply that curiosity, like, why can't I finish this piece? Why, when I sing this song, my voice comes out this way? Why is it that when I exercise in this part of my range, my voice doesn't respond? So a lot of curiosity and a lot of self-compassion, which, I'm saying it like it's easy, or sometimes it's not, because we want to be compassionate to ourselves. And then maybe the inner critic comes to the microphone and starts yelling. But, initially to really take a lot of inventory about what's going on. And then I think it's very important to watch for assumptions. A lot of people start this work and expect that this work has certainly linearity, certain timing, that things will unlock in a certain way. And I don't even know where those ideas come from. Maybe internalization of society, the media, how we think trauma works out there. I'm not sure, but I see a lot of this like, oh, I'm going to feel like a 2 and then a 3 and then a 4 and then a 5. It's like, well, you might feel like a 5 tomorrow and then a 1 the day after, but that doesn't mean that you're losing the progress. It's just how this work works. So I think starting out, it's very important to like set the right expectations. And then also to constantly check in with oneself. It's like as one gathers information, gathers coaching, gathers knowledge, to use all of that as like an integrative experience, but to return to oneself as the main checking point of how does this feel for me? Do I feel safe? Do I feel empowered? Do I feel joyful? Do I feel scared? To basically not make other forces our higher power in this process.
Yes, I think that that is so important. Because, of course, these tools are really, really useful. And I think I love too what you said about certain individuals having an idea that there's this linear process to it. That okay, I'm gonna start from point A, and I'm gonna be at point B in a couple months or in a couple weeks, or I'm gonna be here in a year or whatever. And I've even talked to people who were like, oh yeah, I was done with therapy. Like I was, and the way that they spoke of it was in a way of like, oh, I got, I achieved this thing and now I'm done. And I think that, and I think, everybody's on their own journey and can decide for themselves what they need. But I think it's it's a lifelong journey at times of just getting to know yourself on a deeper level. And so I really appreciate all of this, all of what you're saying here. And of course, I like how you were saying, not just like checking in with yourself, understanding that, you know what is best for yourself as well. Like these are all tools to use, right? And of course, doing the work is only part of the battle when it comes to working through trauma and living more fully. The other challenge for someone is to integrate what they're learning about themselves and their trauma into their daily lives. What are some things that you would recommend so that singers and individuals can integrate what they're learning about themselves into their daily routines and lives? So that way they're taking it beyond just gaining this knowledge, gaining these tools, but can actually use it in their day-to-day lives.
Thank you, Veronica. I really appreciate that question because I think it's so important. That's the other thing too about therapy and coaching. I think sometimes people see it as this like almost like philosophical, very abstract thing. Whereas for me, I really see it almost as like a sport or learning an instrument. There's like a lot of routine and practice that goes into it. Again, not because it has to feel like, oh, we got to do this every day and be disciplined and all that. But the idea that we really create a lot of change in small bites. So sometimes when I work with singers, they start being really focused on the singing voice, the music making. They sort of see everything center there. And then they start realizing the more they start diving deeper, that trauma really seems to kind of like be this pervasive force through a lot of little things like, oh, I wake up in the morning and I have this inner voice in my head that tells me it's going to be a terrible day. I have this sense of dread. I drag myself to the bathroom or, whatever the case may be. And so the idea of starting to practice the tools really in even just the smallest of ways, like maybe it's not that I'm practicing a song right now, but it's that I am sitting, sipping my coffee and something is off. Maybe normally I would want to ignore it. But if I start working somatically, cognitively, intrapsychically, I could teach myself, okay, I'm sipping my coffee, something is feeling off. What does off feel like? Let me first identify where the off is. And maybe the off could be like, I'm feeling this tightness in my stomach. My breath is kind of shallow. My head feels heavy. I kind of feel like I'm five, this idea of sort of going internally and assessing what's going on. Okay, I'm feeling like I'm five. I think what I'm feeling is fear, but it's fear that I'm afraid to show. Okay. And then you sort of like trace your steps back and you're like, what could have created this experience for me? Oh, maybe it's that I was making coffee and it's the same coffee that so and so in my family used to make. The smell brought something back for me. And then you're like, okay, how can I shift this? And then maybe you think about what regulation tools can I utilize? Like maybe I want to ground myself, do some grounding, feeling through these sensations and maybe breathing as if the breath is going through the tight spots or the sensitive spots. I want to talk to this 5-year-old. Hey, you're safe. We're home. We're actually, I don't know, 33. We're okay. We're okay. We're making this coffee because we like it. This like, and then, that starts shifting the physiology greatly. And as that becomes routine, something that almost becomes second nature. It's so much easy for that person, that singer, to navigate the day more easily. And then once they get to the singing, again, this becomes hardwired. So they might start singing and they're like, I picture myself with the audience in front of me, and I'm just like, no, 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 no. Okay, pause. What's going on? All of my muscles are super tense. I'm not breathing. I want to run away. What could I do? Oh, let me actually run away. Let me complete that action in my own body. And then I'm going to come back to my voice teacher. We're going to finish this up. You know what I mean? It's like the idea of developing a different way of looking at things, even in the smallest of ways. Does that make any sense, the way that I describe?
That makes total sense. And I love how, too, you're taking these bits from our everyday life. Because that was really what I was asking about, is like how, because I think that, like I was saying, it's one thing to kind of do this work through therapy or journaling, getting to know yourself through self-inquiry, that sort of thing. It's one thing to kind of compartmentalize that, and another thing to actually practice it throughout your day. I forget where I heard it, but there was this quote that I heard that the path is the work, or the work is the path, or something like that, where it's not just what you do in compartmentalizing this healing part of your life, but what you do throughout your whole day, through what you do throughout your whole life, not just in the practice room, but like you said, when you're sitting having coffee, or like maybe you have another triggering moment throughout your day. And I like how you referenced a couple of different methods of doing that work throughout the day, like noticing what's happening physically, either maybe breathing into it, maybe talking to it. So I love how you're referencing these different modes of, it's not just thinking about it, but actually physicalizing it, having different tools that you can use that really help with that. So that makes total sense. It reminds me of I read this book a couple years ago, No Bad Parts by Richard Schwartz. It makes me think of that, where that idea of speaking to what's happening, or speaking to like, oh, I feel anxiety, kind of speaking at the moment, or I feel this part kind of talking to me at the moment, or speaking up a little bit, and talking to maybe this younger part of yourself. And that's just one tool, right? You mentioned a couple of other tools, like somatic tools, and I think that this is all really wonderful and beautiful. Now, another big challenge that I see singers face, kind of going back more to the practice room and talking less about daily life and more specifically about singing and practicing. A big challenge that I see singers face is performance anxiety. What do you think are some of the misconceptions around performance anxiety, and what are some common things that you see in singers that struggle with that?
Thank you for this question, because I think it's such an important question, such an important thing to talk about. I feel like performance anxiety is almost like the queen of the blocks. And I think one of the biggest misconceptions that I see is that performance anxiety has to do with how experienced an artist is. This idea that the ones who are most anxious are the ones who are starting out, and the big names, the big celebrities, don't have performance anxiety. And I can promise you, from having worked with, artists on all sides of the spectrum, I really don't see a big difference when it comes to like their roles, the years of experience they have, where they have performed, or where they have created. In my mind, performance anxiety really has to do with that fear of being the eyes and ears of the audience, or even, when you're at an audition, the people auditioning you, whoever we want to count as audience. And I think another big misconception is this idea that you have to get over the anxiety. Let me help you get over the anxiety. And it's like, we have to work with the anxiety. Like the anxiety is there signaling to us that something is off. We might think, oh, this is just an audition, this is just a performance, but the singer might be feeling as if there's a bear chasing after them. Like they might be having exactly the physiological reaction. And one of the big questions is why. When I work with artists in my practice, or even in my co-practice with my colleague Stephanie Bianchi, we do this whole analysis of, what is happening when it comes to the performance anxiety. Like, what you imagine yourself in front of these people, what's happening? And that people often describe, a sensation that really seems like they have to run away from a bear or they have to completely collapse or something in between. And so, where is that danger coming from? Because if the body tells us we're in danger, there's something to be afraid of, even if it's something completely related to the past. So, this idea that we have to get over it, or that someone says, well, it's just a show, it's just an audition. Well, not to the autonomic nervous system, it's not. Like rationally, in our cognitive brain, we might say potentially that that's true, but not somatically, not to the autonomic nervous system. So understanding, again, sort of like what the danger association is, what the body is doing, and then how to resource the body, in the face of the anxiety. Like a quick example that I could give you is like maybe someone has this idea that when they perform, they cannot fail, because if they fail, the consequences will be, you know, terrible. And maybe that's because they have associations in childhood where that was actually the case. And so there's this, rush of physiological shifts when they think about performing that completely throw the performance out the window. And it's about really understanding how to bring the person back to a more regulated state and how to create different associations with the performance that are not just, this is dangerous.
Yes, and I like how you were saying to resource the body in those kinds of cases. So going back a little bit to the somatics of it, maybe. And I mean, that's just one tool. I know that, of course, there's all these other tools and things like that. But I think that sometimes we try to intellectualize a lot of things.
Mm-hmm.
And yes, that's crucial to understanding like where this came from. Because like you said in that example, it coming from maybe childhood, it's important to understand that, of course, maybe this is where it comes from on an intellectual, emotional, mental level. But I like how you were saying to go back, maybe resource the body a little bit in that case. Because, yeah,
Yeah.
I think that's really, really important. Did you have more to add to that?
You know, you made me think of something that I really want to say is that when we have these types of reactions, when the autonomic nervous system responds, to the present situation, but really because the present situation is a reminder of the past, it's kind of like we are dragged into the past in some ways, whether it's more of the hyper aroused kind, such as like if we're very panicky, fight or flighty, or if it's more of the hypo aroused kind, such as like if we are freezing, dissociating, shutting down. Or, for some people, it's also a little bit of a mix or kind of like flip flopping between the two. It's like part of what can help is to give ourselves cues that we are in the present. That's one of the reasons why grounding can be so powerful, feeling our feet on the floor, feeling, the texture of whatever I'm wearing, what are some colors here in my environment that I can use to ground myself, the idea of bringing ourselves back to the temporal cues too, like what year is it? What proves to me that I'm not a child right now? Oh, this bracelet that I bought last week. Things like that where we're like, oh, okay, wait, I'm back into the present.
Yeah, I like that a lot. The grounding stuff always helps me because it's like, okay, what do I see in my visual field? I love all of that. It is so helpful, and I feel like every singer needs like one really good solid. I mean, you got a whole toolkit that you can build, of course, but that's always my go-to is like it can always bring me back to the present. Would
Mhm.
you say is one small tool that you think every singer should have when it comes to their mental health, so that way they can sing and express themselves more fully?
I love this question because it brings me to a tool that my former mentor, Luis Montello, used to call the music child. And it feels almost a little bit like an inner child exercise, but it's specific to that child part that discovered the love for music and singing in the first place. So, it's the idea of returning oneself to that childhood moment when the singer was like, I am playing with my voice, I'm singing along with the cartoons, I am dancing around, and there's all this joy. The BS had not come in yet. The pressure had not come in yet. The training had not come in yet. Will I pass this audition? Had not come in yet. It was just joy. And so returning to that moment and spending some time feeling through the sensations of that moment, what was it like for you in your body to just have the joy and nothing else?
That is so beautiful. I really like that because I'll have moments when I'm not even practicing, but just singing around the house or in the car where it's just like, oh, yeah, I love singing. And it just reminds me of, when I was a child and I really just enjoyed using my voice in that way. So I love that there's this practical, exercise that we can really use to tap into some of that. Because I think that sometimes even even tapping into some of that joy results in some really, really good singing, just really good technical moments too, where it just feels
Yeah.
free, it just feels fun. And I think that that's what singing should be. I mean, it's not always like that, but I think that's what it should be. And so I really love that there's this exercise that people can use for that. Well,
Yeah.
this has been a really, really fun conversation. But before we wrap up, as usual, I've got my rapid fire questions. Would you like to do some rapid fire?
Sure.
All right. So the first one that I always ask is coffee or tea?
Well, coffee.
And how do you like your coffee?
I like cappuccino.
Oh,
That's probably because I'm Italian,
nice.
but
Love cappuccino. I feel like that's my big memory of like being in Italy. It was just like drinking a cappuccino like every day, and I was like, oh, this is so good. um, what is a song that you've been obsessed with lately?
song that I have been obsessed with lately. Oh my gosh, I feel like there's so many. Recently I rediscovered a song called Men in the Box by Alice in Chains.
Oh, nice.
And
Okay.
it had been a long time since I had listened to the song, and there's just something so cathartic about the sound of the singing
Yeah.
voice and the music. And it almost reminded me of like what being in academia feels like, sound wise. And so I rediscovered it and I was like, yeah.
I love that. And I love that it's Alice in Chains too. I would not expect that. So I love that. What is the best book that you've read in the last few years?
Well, you had mentioned No Bad Parts,
Hmm.
and that's definitely a really, really good one.
Yeah.
Another one that I am almost finished reading, I actually have it here. It's called The Modern Trauma Toolkit by Christy Gibson. Really, really
Oh,
good book.
she, I feel like there's another book I read by her. Did she write that emotionally immature parents book? I forget who wrote that. I,
It's funny. I have heard of that book so much. Right now, I don't remember who wrote it. Maybe
I was like,
we
that
should
sounds so
Google that.
familiar. Okay, we'll look into that. Nice. What is the last concert that you went to
The last concert I went
or
to
show?
or show, I went to see And Juliet on Broadway.
Oh, nice. I had a student that went to go see that. She loved it. What did you think of it?
It was amazing. I loved it. It was like fun and, not a second that I was like distracted or like
Yeah.
it was just amazing.
Oh, I love that.
Um, yeah, and actually my voice teacher, I lied because 2 days ago I went to see a show that my voice teacher, Cara A. Napolitano wrote and then, basically
Mm.
made a whole play. It's called In Search of Elena, and it was
Oh,
amazing.
nice.
Absolutely amazing.
And this is in New York, or is it?
Yes.
Okay, awesome, awesome. That is so cool. What is your favorite thing to do when you're feeling stressed?
Huh. So many. I would say walking, but I never just
Yeah.
walk. Not never, but I feel like it's walking and listening to music at the same time,
Yes, yes. I
generally.
yeah, I'm the same way. It's either I am, well, for me, it's also running and listening to music that helps a lot. But it's also when I'm walking, I'm always listening to like an audiobook at like one and a
Yeah.
half times speed. like, um, but anyway, last question. What is the best piece of advice that you've ever received?
Best piece of advice that I ever received. Oh, wow. Gosh, there's so many. I remember once someone tell me in a moment that I was really stressed and I was really young, I must have been like 19 years old. Someone said to me, don't forget, you control the things you have to do. It's not the things you have to do that control you. And it's
Oh,
such a small shift in perspective. But I remember in that moment, it shifted everything for me.
yeah. Wow, that is, and I'm like pondering it too because I was, it's so funny because I was literally like journaling about this idea this morning. And so the fact that you said that, I'm like, whoa,
Synchronicity.
synchronicity. Oh man, that is so powerful. I love that. That's beautiful. Sweet. Well, thank you so much for coming on the No Wrong Notes podcast. I'm sure listeners are just going to get so much out of this episode. You shared so many good tidbits of information. I know this was like pretty hard and fast and quick, but I feel like I could pick your brain forever.
Thank you. I mean, you can when you want.
Yay, sweet. All right, friends, that is it for this week's episode. I hope you enjoyed this conversation that I had with Dr. Monti. Like I said, her work with Monti Bianchi Performance, they've just opened a wellness community for artists. As I said in the beginning, you can join them for free. That link will be in the show description, so be sure to check that out if you're interested. Also, I will be releasing a special Halloween episode next month. And as part of that episode, I'm going to be sharing your singing horror stories. Sharing my own horror story. And I would also like to hear from you guys. So if you have a singing horror story, it can be more funny and embarrassing than scary. It doesn't have to be scary. But if you've got a story, I would love it, love it, love it. If you could send it to me on Instagram, or you can email it to me at vkokas1@gmail.com. That'll be in the show description as well. You can send it either as a text, and I can read it on the episode, or if you want to email it to me, you can send a voice note as well. If you've got more questions on this, if you're like, what did she say? What is she talking about? You can, of course, ask me questions over on Instagram. But like I said, I would love to share your horror stories and just make it kind of a fun thing. It'll all be shared anonymously, of course, unless you want me to share your name. I'll share it anonymously with the purpose of reminding us that, you know, we all have crazy moments, crazy singing moments that, we can feel really embarrassed about in the moment that can be really embarrassing. But as I said, we all have them. We are not alone. We are in this together. So, submit your singing horror stories or embarrassing stories either on Instagram or through email. Or if you've got other questions, shoot those over to me on Instagram via DM. All right. If you enjoyed this episode, if you enjoyed this podcast, I would love it if you could leave a 5-star rating and review on your platform of choice if you're listening to this on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. If you're on YouTube, give this episode a thumbs up, subscribe, would love that as well. And in the meantime, happy singing, y'all.